Welcome to Brilliant Corners, everyone, my favourite venue in London. And welcome to Plugged In Live, brought to you by Wax Poetics and Calvin Klein. I'm Kate Hutchinson. I'm a journalist, DJ and broadcaster. I've got a monthly show on Worldwide FM, and I'm very excited to be joined tonight by some of the next generation. Supporting young music journalists, from writers to videographers to photographers and podcasters, is incredibly important, and an area that I still feel is kind of underserved even. But Calvin Klein and Wax Poetics teamed up in search of new voices who can help shape the conversation around contemporary music. Applications were open to any music journalist aged between 18 and 25 and living in the EU or the UK. The judges were on the lookout for unique writers who each had their own musical influences and story to tell. And I've got the 4 finalists sitting beside me. Please, can you give a round of applause? 4. Yes, there we go. On the end, we've got Vuyokazi Mtukela. Thank you. Amelia Fearon. Violeta Arango. And Maeve Hannigan. How are you all doing? You're looking very good tonight, ladies. Brilliant.
Very Powerpuff Girls. I love it.
Yes, Bagsy being Blossom. She was my favourite.
So we're going to spend the next 25 minutes or so, maybe half an hour if you're lucky, talking about the world of music journalism and the brilliant pieces that they've written for Wax Poetics. And then at the end, you can ask the questions if you've got any, and usually they're much better than mine. All right. So to start, I'd like to hear a little bit more about who you are, where you come from today, and what drew you to music journalism. Vu, do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, I guess. So I sort of remember pitching this specific piece. Within that initial pitch, I sort of talked about my music background, and that's where I always start when I think about music journalism. It's what are the records that you were listening to when you were younger? You know, MTV days. You know, you're sitting on the rug with your little, your elbows posted up, and you're looking up at the TV and all of that stuff. And I think, my music background was R&B, it was hip-hop, it was Missy Elliott videos, and Janet Jackson, oh my gosh, what a woman, right?
Yes, for Janet Jackson.
Still got it, she still got it.
And had you been writing before you pitched to Wax Poetics? Had you been writing bits for yourself or for other people?
Yeah, so I had been just writing for myself. I didn't really have the sort of self-belief to pitch for, to an external organisation. So during the pandemic, I just started writing for myself, and I was eventually somebody's going to see this. I want to build a portfolio. I don't have the bylines, but I'm going to write as if I have the bylines and send it off eventually. And if somebody sees value in that, then it's going to lead to the byline, and it did. So that's how I started, yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Amelia? What drew you to music journalism as your form of expression?
It was exactly the same story for me, which is crazy. We spoke about this earlier. During lockdown, I kind of had a big sort of realisation of what I wanted from life and what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do with myself. And I've always been drawn to creativity. And music has been the fundamental thing since I was a child. Similar thing, I remember dancing around to Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson, and it was something that I grew up with. I think being a person of colour and being biracial, I had 2 parents with kind of contrasting music tastes. My mum was a mod, she was into punk, and then I had my dad who was into jazz and Motown, and I kind of grew up with this fusion of 2 different races, 2 different cultures, 2 different backgrounds, and I'm kind of the product of it. And I kind of wanted to express what that meant to me. So I did my article on post-punk music, because moving to Manchester was probably the best decision I ever made in my life, moving there and being surrounded by creative musicians and artists and people. And post-punk is such a fundamental part with Joy Division and New Order and bands like that of Manchester. So that was what's around me. So I just decided this is what I'm going to write about, because this is something that I'm experiencing currently. So.
Great. I want to come back to that in more detail. But Violeta, what about yourself? Were you writing before this your Wax Poetics piece and taking photographs?
So, hi everyone. But yeah, I've been writing before and taking pictures. So my approach to this was more like a full essay. Mine was quite shorter compared to the article. They wrote a lot, but I approached this in a way that I've got a Colombian background. So being the first time when I came to the UK, I came to Leeds, and then coming down to London and seeing quite of like this community that's cooking up and is very grassroots, but it's starting to get to places. I was just like, I think this is very worth it to get documented and to kind of like tell the story, because maybe right now you won't be able to see it because it's hiding in plain sight, but you will probably, in a few years, you'll see the value of it and having everything, like documented, like taking the pictures and speaking to the artists. Plus Baby, which is here tonight, she's going to DJ later, interview her, and Jessica, another artist, and it was basically that.
For anyone that hasn't read your article yet, can you quickly give us a quick breakdown of what it's about?
Yeah, so I spoke to two up-and-coming artists, which are like British-born, but they're Colombian, and we went over their journeys, how they got into music, what they're doing now, and what they expect for the future, and the things that are coming up in this year. So it was basically a biography of them and what their roots and the merging expressions of London meant to them, and how they're coming together, and how that's translating to the new generation. Because I feel like our parents were more like having to survive, and now that with the next generation, we self-actualizing everything, so it's more about self-actualization and the next steps, but how that ties back to the homeland.
Yeah, you write. You write in your piece about how your parents' generation came to the UK in the 80s and 90s and felt like they had to, like you said, like assimilate into the culture that was here. But your generation really is about reclaiming roots and exploring heritage and links to the motherland. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like we all kind of like the product of it, but we have our own unique points of views and our own experiences, because we grew up in different countries. So that was kind of like the goal of the piece, to document how everything comes back to the roots, but how we going somewhere else as we actualize ourselves and learn who we are and where we can go without having to subscribe to anything, just being yourself.
Great. What about you, Maeve? How did you get into music journalism, and why was that the big pull for you?
Hello, everyone. So I think for me, kind of similar to Amelia and Vuyo, but lockdown kind of gave me that space to like kind of think about what I wanted to do and like apply myself. So I just kind of, I don't know, music journalism kind of for me is like a way of creative writing, but I just love music as well. So I feel like it's just a good chance to put yourself into something, but also like explore other people's worlds. I was like cooped up in the Highlands and in Scotland and didn't really have much else to do. So I started applying to things and started writing for like smaller public. And like, I think for me, I really love listening to like Worldwide FM and like NTS, and I don't know, I found it quite difficult to find a publication that like represented that kind of music that I was listening to. So it kind of came at the perfect time for me, I would say. Yeah.
And you wrote a brilliant piece about the Glasgow jazz scene, the emerging Glasgow jazz scene, which is close sort of where you live now.
Yeah. So I live in Glasgow now. I guess I wrote it like from an outsider perspective. But I think Glasgow's such a small place, and it's quite easy to think that it's like everybody knows there's jazz in Glasgow, but like, because when you're in it, everybody knows everyone. But I realised it wasn't, and a lot of these like musicians don't necessarily have the platforms that people do in London. So I just felt like it was quite a good chance to shine a light on what everyone was doing there. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that some of the pieces, I think yours particular, Amelia, and yours, Maeve, are focusing on scenes. You know, is it important to keep it local and to look at home first?
For me, definitely. Manchester, as I said, it was kind of I'm originally from Leeds, which is funny because Leeds and Manchester have got a bit of a beef between each other. But I moved to Manchester for uni, and it was such a... I don't know if you've been to Manchester yourself, but it's a place really unlike no other, I think. There's the manky ego and there's the identity, but for me, I kind of just fit in there, and there was people like me. And I think when I grew up, being a person of colour into rock music and post-punk, I never felt represented with that. And when I moved to Manchester, there's just everyone's into everything. It's more about the community, the sense of self. And when I moved there, I just thought this is the place that I really want to write about. And specifically with post-punk music, I think politically there's been a massive uprising of it recently with bands like Idols and Shame and Squid. And I kind of thought to myself, where's this coming from? Where is this political frustration and anger coming from? And where does it relate to? And I kind of found, as I was writing my article, delving further into that sort of rabbit hole that I accidentally kind of fell into, Manchester really, its post-punk scene was at the core of a lot of it, especially with Factory and the Hacienda, if you're familiar with it. Factory was like a collective of people that decided that they wanted to take ownership of music and how music was distributed, and it's that kind of level of independence. And there's a lot of that with Manchester. In my article I wrote about Sour Grapes Records, who they have the only cassette shop dedicated to cassettes in the country, and it's in Manchester, and they're recording music for bands that they like and putting it out. And I was like, this is amazing. And it kind of goes against the sort of capitalist view of how music sometimes can be.
So you're very much about embracing your local area, your local scene, because you're excited and you felt like you'd found a place there. Vu, can you tell us a bit about your article that you wrote?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I recently moved to Manchester as well, and all of the ladies here were having a conversation about like origin stories and what home meant to us. And I know some of us here like have links to Leeds as well, which is such like an interesting thread that I thought. But I think in the sense of like my piece represented, I think insularity really. I was striving for community. I didn't have references to, I lost my language when I moved here when I was 3. And
where did you move here from?
South Africa. So that's where I was originally born. So this piece represents me reconnecting with my father and my language and my identity. So it was so interesting as well because while I was writing the piece, I would have questions about like certain elements of a song, and I'd be like, what does this mean? I think it means this, but what's your interpretation? And my father was actually a young boy during apartheid. So he had stories about the songs, he had stories about what Zulu hymn meant, what Miriam Makeba meant, and it really allowed me to see him in a new way. And yeah, it was really enriching for all of us as a family.
I don't know if you'll agree with me, but actually writing this piece, I found out a lot about myself and sort of identity, especially being Northern. I feel bad about saying this in London, but you don't have it easy in the North, I think. I think there is definitely a disparity that is sometimes felt. But I just kind of realised a lot about myself as I identify as working class, and I kind of grew up in a single-parent household, and all the things that I think were struggles, but now I take them as like a gift of how I was brought up. But writing, similar thing, I kind of realised so much about myself. I think that's the beauty of journalism really, is that you kind of go into it thinking that you know about a topic, but actually I think the topic ends up teaching you what you know, and that's the kind of beauty of it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned community. Also, another theme that I got from your pieces was belonging. Violeta, that was definitely a theme that I got from your piece. I mean, how does identity play into your sense of what you're writing and your sense of yourself as a music journalist?
I think especially with this piece, it was something that I looked for what would I like to see if I was me and myself having my background. Like I was very selfish with this piece. It was something that I was like, if I wasn't writing, what would be something that I like to read about? And then it was like, okay, I want to read about like South American people, like Latin American people, Colombian people in specific, like because that's my heritage, and I want to know what they do in the next generations in music. And so that was the way in which I started thinking about the piece, and then everything fell together and like came together very organically, because we ended up speaking about community and about this. Music is a very main part of like Colombian culture. You always hear music playing. If you go to the Caribbean side, you've got the sound systems. Everything's playing. There's some merging expressions in it. Music comes from like the history of the country, like colonization and like everything that the country had to go through. It ended up giving us this rich like music scene where we have instruments from like Europe, we have instruments and sounds coming from Africa, we've got black music, we've got indigenous sounds, then we have like all of the European instruments.
Just a few.
Yeah, literally everything merged together. So that that was the kind of like the idea that I had at the beginning. But then it was really inspiring to speak to like Bush Baby, who's over there, and finding that like the community is coming together and we're finding a space where it's not subscribed to what has come before. It's more like an emerging new space, not only for like representation but also for integration, so like people can see how we do it and they can feel welcome in the space and like feel part of it as well.
You're nodding, Amelia.
I completely agree. I think for me, I struggled a lot with my biracial identity when I was younger because of the music that I was into. I never felt represented by the music journalists that I kind of love reading, as much as have much respect for them. They were always kind of like white males talking about post-punk. And I kind of thought, I really want to be a woman of colour that talks about the music, because I know that I have friends that are also women of colour, and I have friends in the LGBT community that don't feel represented in sort of rock journalism, because it's a very male-dominated space, journalism is in general. So I sort of took it upon myself when I wrote it. I thought, I kind of want to be what I didn't have when I was younger, when I was involved, like when I was listening to this kind of music. I thought, but also the other side of it is the actual article itself, like bands like A Certain Ratio, bands that like moved to New York. You had ESG, which were black bands that people don't know about them as much, and I kind of wanted, honestly, with this piece I could have wrote so much more, but it was 5,000 words, but I kind of wanted to promote bands that you might not know as well, and it was really important for me to sort of explore that as a woman of colour and sort of be a face for what I think I didn't have when I was younger, getting into that sort of music. So
we're looking forward to the book.
Yeah, it'll come out soon.
It's interesting what you say in terms of reading writers and not being represented, but Maeve, in jazz, writing about jazz, I mean, I know this also from writing about jazz, there's very few women that are writing about jazz. Did you find that a challenge when you were writing the piece, when you were looking for sort of inspiration or, any writers to take the lead from?
Yeah, I did find that. I feel like Glasgow as well is quite lacking some things in the sense of diversity, and it's not necessarily, it's just the platforms as well that it's kind of lacking. But I did find that, like, especially women in jazz and women of colour in Glasgow was quite difficult to find. And I know they're out there, but it's just like the platforms, like I'm saying, that's what's lacking. But yeah, I think a big thing with Glasgow is like this space. There's lots of space to be creative, but not necessarily the resources. But that just means that there's a huge melting pot of like DIY jazz musicians all kind of doing their own thing. There's like folk jazz, like noisy jazz, like there's literally all sorts. But it's kind of like piecing it all together to be a community is kind of the more difficult thing.
Oh yeah, the piecing it together. I mean, what I got from all of your pieces is how deeply researched, how well researched they were. Did you prefer doing that to the writing? What was the biggest challenge from writing these articles?
For me, I'm an anthropologist, so research comes like hand in hand with like what I do. But I think it was finding the common ground for me and the reader, and also the artist, to like bring everything together. Because when you're passionate about something, you can go into a rabbit hole and start like losing the point, just like beating around the bush or something. But it was basically like saying, okay, what is actually important? What are the things that I want to tell? Like have that kind of like to-do list of things that I wanted to take, and then took it from there.
I think it's amazing that there's 4 women here on stage, but that was totally accidental from what I know. They just liked our pieces the most. But I think that says something that, there's 4 girls writing really cool stories about their experiences. There's definitely the space for us and our voices. And it's amazing. Like, we've all kind of spoke to each other today, and we all read each other's pieces, and we've all got nothing but love to share for each other and each other's stories. And also learning things, I think, about each other. I admit I don't know a lot about the Glasgow jazz scene, but we were actually talking, because we both came from Manchester today, about Maeve's piece, and I learned a lot from it, and that's amazing. Like, I just think that's great that we're all sort of girls, all sort of living our own identities and stories.
Yeah, I feel like going back to the whole scenes things, like I felt like it was quite important, because I know there's like I feel like in the back of your head, you feel like coming from outside of London to kind of make it or like write about things like that, you have to move to London. And I think that is changing, but like, it definitely is changing. But I felt like that was what was really important, to actually focus on what was around me, not necessarily feeling like I have to go with what is big right now.
I definitely think that, you know, as journalists coming up, it's definitely stronger to not be in London. I think, you know, there's too many journalists in London. I think it's really much better if you're plugged into exciting scenes and sounds going on outside of London. I wanted to ask you a bit more about the barriers, you know, that you may have faced. It was interesting what you were saying, Amelia, about how you wanted to write about post-punk, but, you know, it was all kind of older white men that get to write about these things. I mean, I've definitely had that in my career growing up, you know, oh, there's only a certain type of person that gets to write about, you know, dance, music or whoever, you know, and maybe they don't want a piece from a younger, at that time, you know, women journalists coming up and having a different opinion on something. Have you ever faced any sort of, you know, barriers in wanting to write about certain things?
I think with music journalism, there's a sort of level of like, there's more elitism as the older you get, which I can understand the sort of method behind that the older that you get, the wiser you are. The wiser you are, the more you know about it. So I think sometimes you feel like you just don't know enough. Because I was born in 1996, so I was talking about a scene of punk music that started in 1976. Well, arguably. But, you know, you've got the Sex Pistols and these bands that, like, I wasn't there for. And I think a lot of these journalists, like, especially in Manchester, not to name names, but you have journalists that were like, I was there. And post-punk didn't start at the Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester. It started at this date and whatever. And I think the new voice is what needs to be heard. I think it's not that it's more important, but what we're saying and how we experience it reflecting back to it, because I think hindsight is everything. And I think with us, we're not only involved in the music, we're actually relating it to how it relates back to 2022. And I think with my article, I wasn't specifically talking about post-punk in the 80s. I was talking about where post-punk fits now and how it inspires my generation, and how there's this scene of people that are emerging from the bands that sort of set the precipice and set the standard, and how we're sort of relating back to that. And I think politics has got a massive... The last few years of politics in the UK has been crazy, as I'm sure we can all admit. So, you know, with Brexit, the sort of new post-punk it's been coined post-Brexit new wave, with the bands that I've but it's true, these bands are sort of emerging from Brexit because there's a lot of frustrations felt amongst us all. And that's something that I was experiencing firsthand with my own life, and the fact that I was skint all the time and I didn't have money, and then I looked at my friends and they were like, yeah, we're the same. And I thought, this is where the music is coming from, and this is where the idea is. So
you were really relating to it.
Yeah,
I think you can really tell that in the energy of the piece, definitely.
Yeah.
What can outlets and brands and platforms be doing to support young writers such as yourself more?
Well, I want to be like, I don't want to be that guy, but funding man, money. Like, literally, like, because it's so hard to find sustainable like opportunities. You might get one article, you might get one job, you can get one interview, but actually having a sustainable, long-term, like, you know, opportunity, that's really hard to find. And it's good that someone like sees your work and they're like, oh, this is sick, but okay, like, I'm gonna write regardless, whether you like it or not, because I enjoy writing. But if I wanna make a living out of this, then it has to be funded. I have to, you know, have that reliable opportunity, that sustainable journey.
Get that cash. They did that. They were like, we're paying you for your work. You're not doing this for, you know, because sometimes with, I think, publications, it's like, oh, we'll give you the free clothes and you can come to the events and have free drinks. But, you know, like, you know, pay women for their writing, pay everyone for their writing. I think Wax Poetics did that, and I'm very, it's the first, like, big, I've done many sort of freelance journalism, but this was the first, when I got the paycheck, I was like, wow, I'm being paid for my talent here. And that felt surreal, but it shouldn't feel surreal. It should be something that should just be how it is. Pay creatives for the things that they do, and because it's such hard work. This article was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done, in a good way. It pushed me, and it pushed me to my like limits of who I wanted to be as a journalist. And after I got it done and it got published and I was paid for it, I was like, that's me, that's my name there. And that's that's how it should be. It shouldn't even be a question that creatives don't get paid for their work, in my opinion.
I'm like building on that by supporting young people that are like coming up. You're actually supporting the entire community. Because me, I cut my check and I was like, the people that I'm interviewing, you get a bit. You also get a bit. Like I did the processing of the images. I did the scanning. So I went to like this small like photography lab in Southwest London. I also pay them because I needed to use the space. So by doing that, you're funding the culture. So you're not only giving money to someone, you're actually helping everyone to have this organic ecosystem that can keep going. Yeah.
I really love that. It comes back to this idea of community, doesn't it?
Do you know what, actually, I will, Wax Poetics as well, just speaking about like the entire process itself, the editing process. It was hard, and we talked about how hard it was to actually write the piece. But I think I'm so grateful for how gentle, Brian and Andrew were. And I relate that to access, and I relate that to disability, because disabled writers were few and far between, and to have those mechanisms where it's like, you have a space here, how do we help you to build the article that you want? What methods, can we put into place? I think type forms are incredible, and Galden magazine are a really great publication that I think back on, and how they constantly feed back information into the Black community, young women writer community, and they're doing incredible things, and I want to see more of that, and I'm grateful for the experience as a disabled writer on a real.
It definitely seems like the sense I get is that new platforms, as much as they come through, there's a more nurturing approach to young writers, which I think is a really great positive thing. I mean, it sounds like you all started your careers, if we can call it that, your music journalism journeys in the pandemic in the last 2 years. Where's that going to go? Is this just the beginning now? Are you like all writing stuff? Are you pitching stuff? What's happening next?
That's a good question. I don't know. I feel like going back to kind of the whole like being paid and stuff like that, with that comes space and time to like actually be creative and like do all these pitches. And I think that's a difficult thing, is having that space whilst also trying to do everything else to pay the bills.
Completely agree with that, because I think when you've got journalism really shouldn't be a side hustle, but sometimes it has to be. You have to, we're working jobs. When you pay creatives, like you said, for their time and the work that they do, it makes things easier for us. So I completely agree with that.
What about you, Vu? Is music journalism now going to be something that you pursue into the future?
I think I want to write about all lives and all stories, and I don't think that's exclusive to music journalism or music itself. I think there's politics, and there's the economy that we're in right now as Black people, as working class people, as oppressed persons, and I think we have an obligation to everyone. And I just want to find a way to honor the communities that I'm in and that I'm not in.
For me, like I said at the beginning, music's I realised in lockdown a lot of things about myself as I kind of went through this weird journey that we were all in, where we didn't really know what was going on. But for me, the main current, the thing that's always been, since I was there to the age of 25 now, has been music. And it's something that I've always been very passionate about. It's kind of like I found my people, because it's like the things that they're passionate about, and really digging deep into like records and albums and what was going on when an album was released and what that artist was going through. And I was like, wow, other people think of music in depth to how I do. And I've always been like that. I've always wanted to dig deep. So for me, I know that music journalism will probably be a theme of my life for the rest of my life. Even I enjoy music as a hobby as well, just for something that I'm personally interested in, because I think it actually helps me with my life.
Do you feel positive about its future in general, music journalism on the whole?
Yeah, because I think I look at the stage now, and I see 4 women from different backgrounds and different cultures and different races, and we're all here talking about music. And I think that wasn't there when I was younger. I don't think it was. I don't remember reading of female journalists and non-binary journalists and people from the LGBTQ community. So it's incredible to see that. And I think things have changed now from like old school journalism. We were having a brief conversation before about like Enemy of the 90s, and Enemy's not a print-based publication anymore. Everything's kind of gone online, and I think journalism has a lot of sort of changing to do to make it work for an online space, but I think it's definitely possible because we've all connected through it. This whole thing happened from a friend tagging me on a post on Instagram, was like, oh, you like music, you should write for this, and I applied, and then 5 months later here I am. So it's possible, the opportunities are there, we just kind of need to learn how to adapt to the online world.
Yeah, I feel positive about it. I feel like as long as there are people out there like always wanting to dig deep, you're never going to know enough about it. That's what I love about music journalism. Like, you're always learning, and like there's always people to meet, and like there are always people out there who are really passionate about that, whether that's on radio, podcasts, like writing. Yeah, I just think it's never going to die. So I'm pretty excited to be like a part of it and see it grow.
I don't think that appetite for storytelling ever really goes away, does it? It doesn't matter what platform or format it is. Violeta, did you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe like the whole culture of like music is changing, and it's like so exciting to see that so many people are willing to create something, that there's so much space to, research and like being out there and like going to shows or like going to like grassroots parties or like communities that are being created, that I think is exciting, because if you have something to document, then you always have something to write about, I think. So yeah, that's the bit that I think is the most exciting, the whole collaboration and like everyone finding like what they want to do, and me, if I want to be a journalist, then that'll be my role that I play in the whole thing. So yeah.
Wonderful. Like I said, I really get this really strong sense of community and wanting to connect from your pieces, which I think is really, really important in 2022, even now more so than ever. Have we got any questions from the audience, please? You can ask anything at all. If not, that's great, because that means we can drink and eat the amazing food from Brilliant Corners and listening to Bush Baby DJ. Please give it up for our incredible writers. Amelia, Violeta, Maeve, and Vu. To find out more about the stories, and you should go and read them all, please go to waxpoetics.com.